Good evening and welcome. What a weekend it has been. We've had Gloria Steinem, New Yorker cartoonist, science fiction this afternoon, and I can't believe tonight is the last conversation of our first ever Facebook Live Milford Readers and Writers Festival, Doing It Right. I'm Edson Whitney, and I have the honor to be the co-chair of the festival, along with Carol McManus and the amazing group of talented and committed board and committee members who are bringing this event to you, the readers, for the 5th consecutive year. Despite the pandemic, we're excited that we can take the festival global this year with our virtual platform and bring the festival to you wherever in the world you are. I would like to thank Greater Pike Community Foundation and the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts for their generous support. For those of you who have not attended before, this festival is focused on the readers. Our tagline says it all: readers, writers, conversation. You, the readers, come first, inspiring and engaging in conversation with the authors and each other. This evening's conversation, All Boys Aren't Blue, is a discussion of the memoir by author George M. Johnson with journalist Mark S. King. It will be introduced and moderated by Sean Strub, also one of the founders of the festival and a board member, as well as our own Mayor of Milford, activist, author, and founder of Paz Magazine. The conversation will be for 45 minutes, followed by questions from you, our audience. You can post your questions in the comments, and they will be posed by Sean after the conversation. While all the events are free, your donations are welcome, and they are fully tax deductible via the donate link in the comments or on our website at milfordreadersandwriters.com. And you, the viewers, can hit the share button during the conversation and tag your friends in the comments to share this amazing conversation as it happens. So welcome again. Thank you for joining us. Now sit back and enjoy the conversation, and let's welcome George Johnson, Mark King, and Sean Strub.
Okay, thank you very much, Edmund. Edson. And welcome to the last event of this year's Readers and Writers Festival. And I have the honor of introducing George and Mark for this conversation this evening. But to start, I want to make sure everyone sees a copy of All Boys Aren't Blue, published by Farrar Straus earlier this year. It is already become a phenomenon. You'll hear more about it in a few minutes. But as important as we appreciate support for the festival itself, we also appreciate support for the writers who are appearing here with no compensation, by the way. They're doing this out of their generosity, and we want to repay that by supporting them and buying their books. George M. Johnson is a writer and activist. They're based in New York. They've written on race, gender, sex, and culture for Essence, The Advocate, BuzzFeed News, Teen Vogue, TheBody.com, and elsewhere, and more than 3 other national publications. George has appeared on BuzzFeed's AM to DM, as well as on MSNBC. All Boys Aren't Blue is their debut novel, and was an Amazon Best Book of the Year, an indie bestseller, a People Magazine Best Book of the Year, and been optioned for television by Gabrielle Union. The New York Times called it an exuberant, unapologetic memoir infused with a deep but clear-eyed love for its subjects. At the time of the publication, George used he/him pronouns, which you'll see in some of the press coverage. And we are so very, very happy to have George with us this evening. And I also just want to add one other sort of personal note, George Johnson. Earlier this year, I read a piece in TheBody.com that George wrote about U equals U, undetectable equals untransmissible, which has become sort of a mantra and a saying to convey the message about how people with HIV on effective treatment are not transmitting the virus, not able to transmit the virus. The piece was a complicated issue, but it was so sophisticated, and it got to a level that many of us involved in advocacy had been kind of feeling, but unable to articulate. And George nailed it in this column that was so extraordinary that I tracked him down to talk to him about it. I'm just really, really pleased that he's with us tonight. Mark S. King is a longtime friend of mine and an icon in the AIDS journalism community and activist community. He's a blogger, writer, and an actor. On some other occasion, maybe we can get him to show us his commercials he did for Wendy's when he was Mark has tested positive for HIV in 1985, the same year I did when the test came out, and he became an activist. Earlier this year, this has been a big year for Mark as well. The Association of LGBTQ Journalists presented Mark with the Sarah Pettit Memorial Award for the LGBTQ Journalist of the Year. He's also the creator of the video blog My Fabulous Disease, which this year won GLAAD Media's the 2020 GLAAD Media Award for Outstanding Blog. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark and to George, and I look forward to hearing what you have to discuss today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you very much. First of all, congratulations to Milford for hosting yet another cultural event and doing it so well. I'm honored to be sitting here, and I'm honored to be sharing the screen here on my laptop with the two of you. Hi, George. How are you?
I'm pretty well. How are you doing today?
I'm okay. How are you has become a really loaded question, hasn't it?
Right.
Existential, you know, but I'm holding up. I'm doing okay. I'm happy to be here right now. I'm very much in this moment, and I'm excited about this. You know, I want to say, first of all, also, I know we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to rush through a lot of things because I'm really excited about this. But I want to say that I also, you also came to my attention as a writer, and as as an activist and a social critic and all of these things at about the same time you did for Sean when you wrote this particular article that was HIV related. And since then, I've been kind of discovering you retroactively. I've been going back and seeing, and I'm a little ashamed. I feel as if I should have known you much longer than I have, but it's been kind of interesting, well, really interesting and fun to go back and read a lot of your social criticism. I say that, you know, in a really great way about race and gay men and gender identity and HIV. And you come to this being a lot more to me than a guy that wrote a book, a really good book. You come to with a really breadth of experience. And so this is going to be a lot of fun. So it's nice to be able to do this. All Boys Aren't Blue, I want to say, is a selection of essays, but it's really a story. It didn't even strike me right away that it was kind of freestanding essays. I thought I was reading a story from start to finish. Yeah. And it's coming of age of you as a Black queer man, which is revolutionary, isn't it? You say somewhere in there, is it on the title of the book? I'm not even sure, that it's your manifesto.
Yes.
Which I thought, that takes guts for a young man like yourself to call it a manifesto. And then I realized what you meant as I went along, because it's not just any coming of age, is it?
Right. I think what's special about it is, like you said, it's not just any coming of age story. And the book is specifically young adult, which comes with another set of factors that, you know, many of the adult Black queer memoirs don't kind of have to deal with in the same arena as me. When you go into young adult, you know, that's school systems, and that's boards of educations, and that there's that school and library, there are whole departments for that. And so the type of criticisms that those type of stories can face, it's a burden in many ways, right? If I were writing, and originally I was going to write like an adult memoir, but a lot of my work is geared towards helping Black children, Black queer children specifically. And so with the decision to really say like, okay, like this is a declaration for Black queer people to finally feel seen, to finally feel like they can see themselves like on the cover, that they can read the words and then have the language to express what they've always felt the need to express in the things that they couldn't get out to their family members and to their peers and to their coworkers in many ways. You know, I get a lot of messages about the book, but the one I get most common is, this is the first time I felt seen. And to think, you know, as Black queer people who have always been here from the beginning of existence, for us to still be having firsts in many ways, and for us to still be processing, you know, like the first time I felt visible or felt represented or felt the language or felt these words. I think that speaks to why it's such a manifesto in many ways. It was, I guess, like my declaration of really stating how I got here, but like who I've always been. Because I think by the end of it, although you know that there's still more to the story, once you see who I am today, it's very well summed up because that's who I've always been from birth.
You know, a lot of the structure is one might expect from a coming of age story. You talk about literally growing up and who your family was and your place in it, and the beginning of sexual longing and the treacherous environment of the playground, which I remember so well, growing up gay. And you have to talk about your family a lot. How are they with that? Because you reveal a lot of things. And I want to get back to this young adult thing because I remember Highlights magazine. I remember the Hardy Boys. I think we may have read Wuthering Heights, and some of it was a little steamy. I've never seen content like this. Young adult clearly has changed quite a bit.
Yes.
And I want to get back to that, but please tell me about your family and how you negotiated with them what you were going to reveal in this book.
Yeah. You know, the decision wasn't hard to I guess, to come to terms with what I was going to talk about. Of course, they asked very early on. And so I was just transparent and honest with them that there were some things that happened that they didn't know about, as well as stories like once I got into college that you just don't talk about with your family. And so it wasn't tough conversations. I will say my Aunt Sarah, she was like one of the first people who I talked to. And she was just like, listen, this is your story and we're your family. So tell your story, but don't worry about us. Like, we'll be fine. Like, you know, at the end of the day, we'll be fine. We're a family. But it's important that you tell your story and tell this story because so many other people need to hear it and read it and process it and understand it. And so I guess, you know, in many ways, I'm fortunate that I come from a family who allows me to be transparent and allows me to be vulnerable and allows me to publicly go through the journey of my queerness, because I don't do it privately. I do it very publicly. I make declarations all the time through social media. I talk about how I'm feeling, what I'm going through. I talk about sex, my sex life, sexuality, because I know how important, because I know how long that those type of topics have been kept from everyone. In particular, the communities that need to hear those kind of conversations. And so there are definitely moments where they're like, you know, like, well, I just skipped over that part, or, you know, I didn't want to know all that. But for the most part, they really, really championed it and supported it. And I mean, I guess for them, it was like, we've been supporting, they call me by my middle name, Matthew, but it's like, we've been supporting Matt their whole life. And so what will make us stop now? Because Matt is simply telling their truth. And I think it speaks to the power of, you know, the love that Black families have for one another. And I think it also pushes back against like that, how, you know, there's always like this saying about how Black community is more homophobic, and, you know, it's always being pushed and projected. And so part of this story was to say, like, yes, I dealt with homophobia. And yeah, in many ways, my family may have struggled with it. In many ways, Black families struggle with it, but all families across communities, across ethnicities deal with homophobia, and our community is no different. But we have some stories that need to be out there because it can create the change that we need to see within other Black families who are struggling with kids who may have different gender identities.
You know, it did challenge a lot of my own prejudices, and one of them being, oh, it's a Black family. Oh, gee, he'll be in trouble here, you know, and yet, no wonder your family had no problem you talking about it, because their reaction was almost across the board, loving and accepting of who you were. There are other family members who fall on the LGBTQ spectrum who were also embraced. how common do you think that is? My family was accepting eventually, but it wasn't baked in. It wasn't baked in from the start. It was a process over years. Certainly did I not feel accepted necessarily out as an adolescent. How common is this? We hear a lot of horror stories as LGBT people. This is not a horror story, your book, at all about your family.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, but again, there were moments of trauma with my family, right? I think for me, I think what was important was telling the totality of the story. And so I think a lot of people's existences are only told through the traumatic lens, and people don't get to tell the totality of their story. I've seen many families where a queer child may have fallen out of family, but then, in the end, their parents work through it, and, they have a loving family now that they can talk to, that they can process these things with. And then we've seen the reverse of that, where many queer people have had to do what's called created families, and they, you basically build the community that you want to have supporting you, and that's through your friends. I've brought several queer friends home. My family loves on my friends who may not have family or family structures. And so it's like, I'm not sure if it's like an uncommon thing or a common thing as much as it's just a thing. And I think it's just one of those things because we live in a heteronormative society. And so when parents are conditioned and society is conditioned to be only one way, which is when they say, I want to have a healthy child, they really mean a healthy heterosexual child. And so then when a child starts to do things that are not heterosexual or fall into the norm of what a boy is or what a girl is, it's almost like an act of defiance. I think parents see it as first. I don't think they see it as the thing that they're supposed to nurture. I think they see it as the thing that they're supposed to squash or quash, because that's what they're taught, and that's all they know. And so, but again, I just think it's a thing simply because normalcy is to be heterosexual. And so I don't think that there are many families, no matter what race, who just automatically have that loving thing, because that's not what they were conditioned to be. We're conditioned to be like that. But I think that there are many families that have worked through those type of situations and have had different friends or relatives or co-workers or, who may have been queer that may have helped their family then be able to adopt more, more understanding just around queerness and those type of family members.
And despite it being a queer book or about a queer childhood, the fact is there's so much in there that anyone can relate to, the awkwardness of growth. By the way, you write about awkward sex as honestly and as well as anything I've ever read. I just want to say that just the stumbling, fumbling, trying, hoping, because there's so much emotion and expectation, and I'll tell you that those passages, I was so totally there with you. So thank you for that. And, I want to say you write confessionally, but I guess it's not a confession because you're so matter of fact about it. It's not like you have to confess something that is wrong. And yet you write about a lot, when I wrote a memoir about coming of age and during the dawn of the AIDS epidemic, a generation or more before you. And I remember when I was writing it, I had blinders on. I thought to myself, I need to write this as if no one will ever read it. I need to not think about who's going to read this. I just need to write the truth. And I remember my mother telling me she had to kind of like flip through pages and do this until she got back to something that she could read, because there was a lot of adult stuff in there. You seem to write knowing full well who is going to read it. Getting back to the young adult thing, you wrote knowing exactly who is going to read it, and doing that without shame.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting though, because like when I first wrote it, I was being very technical around certain topics because it was like I knew I needed to talk about them, but it was almost like, how far can I go? Because in my mind, you hear young adults, so you automatically assume like, I can't say this word or I can't put this topic in here, even though this topic needs to go in here. So it's like, I'm going to include it, but I'm going to write technically around it. And it really was my editor, Grace, who gave me the go ahead during edits to be like, no, like write about it. Like you can really, really write about it. And
what was that negotiation like? In other words, what were the parameters? Did you know what they were, or did you just write anything and then have to negotiate later about what could be included in a young adult book?
Yeah, I wrote first. I didn't ask first. I wrote it first. I just chose to, I wrote mildly about it. So I didn't get as like in detail or as graphic initially with how I was writing this, the sexual parts, the sexual assault parts, and like all of those parts. Like I was writing about them technically, not emotionally. But after you go through edits and they're like, no, like you can really, really write through this, like write all the way through it. That's when I just was like, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, then I need to go all the way there. Like, don't go halfway there, go all the way there. And I think that's what allowed for the story to be told the way it was told. And for me, it was the fact of the matter is like, these things happened to me, but they happened to me when I was 10, and they happened to me when I was 12, and they happened to me when I was 15. So if these things can happen to me at that age, then a person that age needs to be able to read about them.
When you say it has to be, obviously there's parameters, they're dealing with school districts and all that. I assume that your editor, your publisher knows what they can include and what they can't.
Yeah.
So this book is in schools right now. In what, junior high or what, where is it? What kind of schools, what student can access it now?
I've seen high school, and I've also seen junior high school libraries. So between junior high, I think the age range, I think we put is 14 to 18, but I've seen as young as 13 and 12 have access to the book to read it. Because again, some of the things happened to me at that age. So for me, it's like, it doesn't make sense for you to hand this book to a 15-year-old if the traumatic thing happened to them at 13.
Yeah.
Like, it makes sense for you to hand it to them when they're 12, so they'll know how to deal with the traumatic thing or fully avoid the traumatic thing. I always say, like, keeping heavy topics away from kids doesn't stop the heavy topic from happening to kids. What it does is they then go into those situations ill-informed, without the resources, and have to make very adult decisions without the proper knowledge or resources that you could have given them. So it's best to just go ahead and give them the knowledge and give them the resources up front, so that when they encounter the situations, they know what their options are and what they can do.
You had talked about being seen, and how some of your readers say, you see me, and that you wanted for people to be able to see something that they'd never seen before. I was trying to think to myself, when was the first time that I saw myself in a book? Did it even happen? And the closest I can come up with is I was 17 and Faggots had just come out. Larry Kramer's book, which is a phantasmagoric look into selfish, self-centered, sexually obsessed, drug-addled gay men. And I remember I wanted to be that, because it was the closest I'd ever come to reading anything about a community I was then entering as a 17-year-old. But I was horrified. I was like, oh my God, that's not me. That's not the person I am. And as a side note, within a few years, that was exactly the person that I was. I became that selfish, self-centered, drug-addled. That was me. But I guess what I'm saying is that's it. That's what I had. Faggots. A book called Faggot. Do you remember the first time you saw a piece of art, whether a film, TV, book, anything that said, they see me?
It's funny. I get this question, and I'm always like racking my brain, like, did I see me? I think I've seen queer people on TV. I don't think I've saw me per se, but I did see people who at least were in my community. And so like I had references to know that we existed and that we had pockets of us. But unfortunately, no. And, unfortunately, oftentimes the way that we were even portrayed on television was very, very to fit a cast type, like to fit what the heterosexual imagination of a queer person was. And so to them, it was flamboyant. and to them it was over the top, and to them it was, you know, these certain things. And even though many in our community are those things, that was the only thing that heterosexual, how they wrote us. It was always sassy, or it was always like, it was always very cast typed to how they write us, you know, as characters. I will say, like, nowadays, you know, we have like Pose, which definitely now gives, you know, multidimensional trans and Black queer characters a story and backstory of different types and different origins. But still lacking, you know, in so much. And, you know, we have, you know, Laverne Cox out there, and we have Angelica Ross, and like we have all these actresses and actors. I think Jeremy Pope. Like we're starting to see more of us in more roles that give us, you know, at least a little bit more of range of like who we are and what we are. But by and large, I think we're still kind of like trying to figure it out. I mean, and I think, you know, I think the proof of that is there's a book, Felix Ever After, which just got optioned by Amazon about trans Latinx. It's a trans Latinx fiction story, right? So that'll be like one of the first of its kind that we'll get to see on TV. My book being optioned by Gabrielle Union. That's important because that'll be one of the first of its kind where the lead is a Black queer boy. I can't think of, you know, it just is there, right? Like, I mean, besides
these things lead to other things. Lead to other things.
Yeah, and
in other words, your art leads to other art.
Right, exactly. And you know, so like I said, we've had, and again, I want to make sure Daryl Stevens with Noah's Ark was probably one of our, you know, great shows that we always, you know, have nostalgia over. But yeah, I think we're kind of building what it looks like now to so that the next generation of kids will only know that they've seen us and that they had us. We had people that looked like them and multidimensional characters and books where they were on the cover and language to use. It's just something we didn't have even in the 90s when I was growing up.
I read somewhere you were talking about what blue meant to you, and you were giving several examples of what it meant. And you mentioned Moonlight, the film, and I immediately thought, I'm a freak about film, and I can name on two hands scenes in films that just destroy me, that I'll always return to. And it's the scene of the young boy at the dinner table of this couple that have kind of taken him in, and he's what, 8, 9 years old, and he says, "What does fag mean?" It kills me every time. I know what that's like. I've been that boy, but I didn't have a father figure to ask because I would have been too ashamed. Yeah. And you say that movie changed you. It changed a lot of things for you. I'm wondering what those were. What?
Yeah, it did. And I wrote 2 or 3 articles about the movie, and I actually was able to, you know, befriend Terrell Alvin McCraney, who I think is just one of our greatest visionaries, especially not just Black and queer, but just Black, like just one of our greatest Black visionaries that we have. And just always creating exciting work. Like David Makes Man is another great show that deals with queerness as well. They have queer characters on there too, and queer and trans characters on there too. And yeah, Moonlight meant a lot because even though it was just scraping the surface, it just was like, okay, like this is what we go through. Not necessarily gay men per se, because at no point did they ever identify as such. However, the masculinity issue and what that then means, right? And how Chiron, from such a young, sweet boy, by the end had become this hyper masculine, muscular, like as a protection. You know, the rage that Chiron had when he went into school that day and attacked, you know, or defended himself realistically after being attacked. But that rage, like that rage is something that many of us as queer people, specifically Black queer people, live with every day. We just know that our existence can be taken at any time simply because of our existence. And that movie just touched on enough of the elements that it gave voice and it gave license to at least be able to start to have those conversations. Because it's not just Black queer people who deal with masculinity issues. And it is also a Black it is a Black heterosexual, Black male image thing. And there are still many Black people who identify as heterosexual that have queerness. And I'm not trying to be queerness, but struggle with their sexual identity. That's the best way I can put it. And struggle with their gender identity, but would never publicly be able to do that because there is no space for it. And I think Moonlight was one of those movies that started to create the space, which gave me confidence to write a book, as did Darnell Moore's book, No Ashes in the Fire, Michael Arsenault's book, I Can't Date Jesus. I mean, I just think it was like a queer, or currently we're just going through like this really dope Black queer renaissance period of where we're able to put these important works out there for everyone.
You know, you talked about, you mentioned just the armor of masculinity and being kind of trapped in that armor. And I see that among gay men in general, because we're fighting against what the expectations are. I'm going to be more masculine than you, so you can't have anything to say about it. And this whole kind of steroided circuit party body that I grew up with, you know, that was my kind of my adulthood. And because we were, well, I'll speak for myself, I was terrified of the alternative, that I might be a sissy, that all of those messages I got growing up on the playground would be true. I say that because I think of your Instagram game, as I call it, you know, your presence on social media, these fabulous photo shoots you've been doing. I don't know who's taking your pictures in quarantine, but they're amazing. And you really screw around with and by that in a playful way, with masculine and feminine stuff. In one picture, here you are and you're shirtless and you're well built and you've got the leather straps and the whole thing and lace gloves. You know what I mean? You're messing with us. I'm saying, I don't know what your intentions are there. I'm just saying you're having some fun messing with masculine, feminine stuff. And to me, that's the courageous stuff. That's the gay I wanted to be, and I was too afraid to. So I went to the gym and I got the trainer. I did that whole thing so I could present a certain way instead of this fabulous creature you are, or that you deliberately present in your Instagram game.
Yeah, it's all and it's intentional. I say it all the time. Like, I don't do anything without intentions. I know that if I wanted to go further, I could, and I'm sure I will. But those are things that I've always felt. I've always wanted to wear makeup, and I've always wanted to wear lashes, and I've always wanted to do those things. And I've always wanted to wear pants with a train on them, and was always afraid to be that person. But now I know the stakes have always been high. And what I know is when you have a spirituality and when you really, really believe in your ancestors and you look at what they did and what they pushed back against, and specifically the queer ancestors, because they're documented and there are pictures of them, and they're like, to think of like what times they were living in and what they were doing publicly. It lets you know that it was done because someone needed to see it. And someone needed to be able to speak truth to power and be able to say, yes, this existed because I saw it and it's here. And I feel in many ways that's what part of what my purpose is it wasn't just to write the book and say that I felt this way as a child and I only imagined myself as a girl and all of these things. It was to say, and now I'm going to show you what that looks like and what that feels like, and show you that I can wear suits with lace gloves if I want to, and veils, and all of those things that are comfortable to me, because whether it's comfortable to you or not isn't up for discussion in many ways, because it's what's comfortable to me. And it's like, I think one of the sayings is like, don't yuck my yum, but it's in many ways, it's like, you know, you all do things that people don't like, you still do them. So I'm going to do things too. But I also think it's important because even in queer community, we're still not there yet, right? Like, we're not all loving of femmes, and we're not all loving of people who express themselves differently. And so I think because, like you said, I do have a nice body and the tattoos and those things that typically cis gays are going to be attracted to, and the handsome looks and, you know, all those things that cis gays are attracted to. When I then go this route of who I am and identifying as non-binary and telling you that I'm this thing, and you're still attracted, you now have to interrogate yourself. It forces you to now have to interrogate everything you thought you knew about yourself because you didn't think you liked people like this, quote unquote. And so I think that's also part of it too, was I needed to clear out people who didn't really support or know who I was, while also challenging people who still stayed around as to maybe you need to do a little bit more interrogating of if you're where you are or if you are who you think you are.
There was a period in the 90s in which I was part of a drag troupe that raised money for AIDS. And every Sunday night we had a show. And I would always be sure, if anybody did know about this, the fact that I did this, that it was performance. I wasn't a drag queen. It was performance. And as soon as the show was over, before I even left the dressing room, I would take off all the makeup and put on my tank top and go to the bar to dance with my shirt off, because I had to kind of wipe off, shake off all of that play acting I'd been doing. Clearly I have issues, but the point is, I would like to think if this were all today, I would be Instagramming the hell out of myself, right, in all of my fabulous gowns and stuff, you know, as opposed to putting it aside as quickly as I could. Right. And that's the kind of inspiration you're providing people.
I mean, I hope so. It seems to, I mean, yeah, like people reach out to me and tell me, you know, all the time that what they feel is like I'm breaking barriers in many ways. And again, I think what's so funny is like, I intentionally do it with one purpose. I don't necessarily think about the barriers or like what it's breaking or what it's meaning in society so much. It was even like when I decided I was like, my pronouns are they, them, I'm not binary, and I said it publicly and it went viral. I had no expectation that it was going to go viral when I made that post. I just was just letting people know so that they could address me correctly. But sometimes I forget that because I am so visible and I am this person, and my book is this piece of activism that is leading this charge of storytelling about Black and queerness, not just in classrooms, but across the United States and across the globe in many ways, because it's, you know, internationally people have the book too. So it's much bigger than I'm just taking a picture. It you know, it becomes something much bigger than that.
Well, and your editors are, you know, your agent must love this, because it feels as if it's just as important these days that you are cultivating your own brand as a human being. I mean, for lack of a better word, a brand. I mean, you know, it is branding, I guess, you know, not that you're not being authentic, and that's the trick, isn't it? You're building a brand based on authenticity, and you're building it through all of these, you know, outward public facing things. And when you look at those people that are all of the actors that you mentioned, all the producers and the writers you mentioned, they have a strong brand identity as individuals. Janet Mock, everybody, they have this strong identity as individuals. So your agent must be thrilled, just from a business standpoint, but also just you personally, that you are able to be so authentic, and that is actually, there's a synergy to it, isn't there, between your writing, your work, and your personal identity?
Yeah, I mean, it all goes hand in hand. I always say, like, I don't want my social media to reflect a person that's not me. I think a lot of people's social media aren't them. It's the pieces that they want to put out. And I get that, but I chose a long time ago that my social media would be very, very reflective of who I am and tell my entire story. And so, you know, when people read the book, they usually will see me do something, or they'll see me smile or something, and they'll be like, oh my God, that was in the book about how you don't smile. And they'll go through a lot of my pictures and be like, oh, you really don't smile, George. And they're like, okay, like this all connects. Like, it's not some like trick or like some type of downtrodden story. Like, you really are working through it. The fact that I just got braces, the fact that, or Invisaligns, and, you know, like, but I share that type of stuff. And so people really connect to it because, again, it's like the book speaks to the Instagram, speaks to the Twitter, speaks to when I have live conversations, speaks to when people meet me in person. And like I said, it all goes hand in hand as to the totality of who I am as an individual. And I think a lot of people appreciate my platform because it's so genuine, because it really is me. It's not me putting on, it's not me. Yeah, like I don't just show the good parts. And
and that's the key, isn't it? That's the key. It's the real deal. You know, you don't have to worry about, if you're telling the truth, you don't have to worry about what you said, you know, when you're telling the truth.
Right.
I have so many other questions for you about just your writing process and stuff, but we're running out of time. And so I want to get to matters of race. You know, I was reading this book, I think it was in week 1 of George Floyd. And so obviously I mean, that's when I read it. And so of course our lives were consumed with what was going on. And so I couldn't help but have that lens as I read your whole book. And gosh, there's so much. Let's start here. You mentioned in passing in the book that your father was a cop. And you don't dwell on it. There are not a lot of stories about it. It's, you know, of course, you know, tell me more. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about him wearing the uniform. Did he ever I know that he had talks about safety for you as a black man. Yeah. Just tell me more about that, about having a father who was a cop.
I mean, my dad was a cop, a typical cop. He worked for the police department in our city for 30 years. Highest rank was lieutenant. But it didn't come without his fair share of racism. I mean, I just was talking to him the other day, and he was just talking about how, you know, as a cop, how much racism he faced on the force. So much so that they had like their own black cops union and their own black cops. Like that was necessary because there was just still so much inherent racism in the system. I don't necessarily think like my dad grew up wanting to necessarily be a cop. I think he had a family. It was a good line of work to go into in 78. And that's what he went into in 1978. He became a cop, or 77 or 78. Our household though wasn't like, you know, like I'm sure you see it on TV, how cops act. My dad wasn't like that. My dad was strict, but, and he was much, you know, very much about the law and everything, but he was also about the protection of his kids. And, you know, he knew like we couldn't go outside with toy guns. We couldn't, even if he bought them for us, he knew, and he would tell us like, you can't go outside with those, like black kids get shot all the time over nonsense. You know, these white cops don't care that y'all my children. Like, you know, all of those conversations still had to happen. Like I said, I think to him, it was a job. I don't think it was, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think it was like something like he wanted to like necessarily quote unquote fix his community. I think he saw it as a way to help fix his community. I think nowadays, I mean, he still believes in police. I don't believe in police. My younger brother is also an officer, but he wanted to be an officer his whole life because my dad was an officer. Yeah. It's just different philosophies from the same family. I'm an abolitionist. I believe that they're not necessary. Conversations sometimes get interesting at Thanksgiving. You know, my ultimate goal is, you know, make enough money to get my whole family, any of them that's in law enforcement, up out of there, and we, you know, go run our own businesses and do our own things. But I would say, like, growing up with him in a cop household, it just was interesting because, you know, you definitely still had privileges being a cop's child in many ways, like getting out of tickets and you know, certain things like you could get a little, you know, they would give you a little bit of leeway on that type of stuff. And like, so there were definitely those type of things, you know, even within the city, right? Because everybody knew that we were the cops, we were Greg's kids. So like, we didn't necessarily have to worry about getting messed with per se, because everybody knew our dad was one of the top cops in the city, right? And then you had police officers in schools who knew who his kids were. So it all played a role hand in hand. And in many ways it was embarrassing because in middle school, the cops would, yo, your dad told me to get you this. And, you know, like a cop walking up to a child while all his, you know, peers are looking like, well, how do you know the police? Like, why do all the cops know you by first name? You know, so it was stuff like that. But But honestly, yeah, you know, I grew up in a cop household, and I became active. I became who I became. You know.
I, you know, uh, we keep referring to the racial reckoning going on, and in this country right now, and I'm not even sure if that's the right word. As we get into race, I become less and less confident of my words, especially around you, George, only because I want to be sensitive. I want to be right. At any rate, and I think that what I just displayed is what a lot of white people are going through right now, who consider themselves allies, as I do, and that is we're kind of stumbling through, unplugging from the matrix, and realizing, oh my God, it's all more racist than I thought, and I've been participating in it, and it's flooding over us. And yet I have friends who are Black activists who are exhausted. They don't want, you know, they're exhausted. And I'm learning so much, and I'm doing my homework, and I'm reading the books and all of that. And I did a workshop with facilitators who were Black about anti-racism. And they said to us, whatever you do when you're done with this workshop, please don't go run to your Black friends and tell them all about it. They're exhausted. You're paying us. Don't go to your, you know, well, what was the first thing I did? I picked up the phone and I called my friend. I called my friend Derek, and I said, because I had to tell, anyway, I did exactly what I wasn't supposed to do. This is all to say, I feel as if we're stumbling through this. And I know that you, as someone who's been a long time anti-racist advocate and writer, I wonder how you view this. I'm dying to know if you think it's a phase. Do you think that it might mean something this time? And when you look at your white friends like me who are awkwardly stumbling through, do you roll your eyes? Do you cheer us on? What are you feeling about all of that? I know that's a lot. But.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always say, like, every generation has their I guess their revolutionary, like their like major revolution, or their major like period of change. And so, you know, I just think that that's where we're at, right? I mean, if you look at it, the country is definitely being.
Well, that sounds hopeful, at least.
I mean, hopeful. I mean, it depends, right? Like, the country is literally being pushed to the brink of if these laws even matter, because clearly Congress doesn't really matter. Clearly, like, none of those things actually matter. And I think a lot of people are learning, like, these checks and balances really don't work, and they've never worked. They've only worked when everybody agreed that being racist and anti-Black covertly was the way to go. Once it became overt, these systems no longer work because they only operated on the covertness of what y'all were doing. But now you have one party that is operating overt racism, another party that's operating covert racism, and neither can come to an agreement on which actually works best. But at the end of the day, it's all racism and anti-Blackness that both parties are the, you know, the underbelly of what both parties stand for and have always stood for. Optimistic. I mean, I think as Black folks, we've always been oppressed. So I think this is just kind of our time where we're still fighting, because we always have to fight, because that's what we know for survival. But in many ways, we're just kind of stepping back and laughing, because, like, this is the first time that you have white people who feel oppressed, which, I mean, is almost funny to say it off your tongue, because it's like, y'all still aren't oppressed. You just feel oppressed because you thought that all of these things mattered. And in the fell swoop of a pandemic, you realize this country was held together with duct tape and glue, and fell apart in less than 2 months. The entire United States fell apart. So it lets you know that the United States had always been hanging by a thread. Mm-hmm. But as Black folks, our existence was always like that. So it, you know, although this harms us first and it harms us most, we have been through this time and time and time again. We've been through every iteration of change, and we've always been at the forefront of it, or those, you know, where we know how to adapt, we know how to move, we know how we kind of know what we got to do to survive these things, because we've always had to know what to do when white folks started to get combative with one another. But yeah, I mean, I don't believe in allies, like, because ally means mutual exchange. And I don't believe that like there should be a mutual exchange between Black people and white people at this point. Like, it shouldn't be like a scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It's like, no, fight for us. That's it. Like, it's been 400 years. I don't know what else to tell you, right? It's been 400 plus years of us be going through this. So it's okay for y'all to go stand on the front line and leave us alone, you know? But I do think it does call, you know, it makes y'all have to question everything that y'all have done, or every system that you participated in, or everything that you know. And even in the book, when I talk about Abraham Lincoln and all of the quotes about race, you know, about slavery, and it was like, yeah, like these people become forefathers, these people become champions, these people owned us, but y'all then shove them down our throats as if they're like important people. But it's not that y'all didn't know that they owned slaves, right? Like, because we all knew it. But that's just how we're taught in elementary school, right? That George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Monticello. But it's like, okay, but it was during slavery, so did they own slaves or not? And it's like your teacher's just like, oh yeah, they did, but you know, that was just a sign of the times. It's like, but that doesn't even make any sense, right? And so I think when we have like this type of reckoning going on, people are like, I can't believe Donald Trump gets away with it. It's like, why? Other presidents got away with owning us. Like, you know what I mean? So like, we get to sit back and be like, but you knew that the other presidents literally owned people. So why don't you think that the current president can do these type of things to people when the whole country was built on that? But us as Black people have always had to know that. I think now y'all as white people are having to be challenged with that.
No, absolutely. And I've caught myself many times with that basic kind of variations on, well, white people are mad about it, so it must be a big deal now. Oh, there's white women at the front of the protests in Portland, so now it's going to be a big deal. As if that lended a legitimacy that wasn't there before.
Right.
You know, and so I continue to catch myself in that very trap that you're talking about, which was, it's always been bad. You know, so what, you're showing up now? So now what, I guess. And so, George, now what? And that all being said, now what?
I mean, now I guess we'll head to this election. I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't think it even is for us to know. I mean, I think at this point, the country has reached the country's been at its breaking point for a while, but I think this is just kind of like the referendum on whether or not how the country will move forward. Either, you know, these politicians are going to lean in heavy on the Constitution and all of these principles and the Bill of Rights and all these things that they created, or they're going to let them all be destroyed, and we'll enter, you know, our first phase of fascism in many ways. But I mean, the choice isn't on Black folks or brown folks. The choice really is on what do white folks want to do, because there are more of y'all than us. So
this has been so great. Thank you so much, George, for letting me pinball through all of those topics and get your take on it. Sean, I see you showing up, and I bet that means that there are questions.
That is exactly what it means. And thanks for a great conversation. First question we have is from Stephanie Osipinski, who wants to ask, George, do you have any advice for queer POC who are exploring gender neutrality in their 20s, but scared about talking to their families?
Oh boy. Any advice? I always say to anyone, like, change the language. So the language that's always used is like that you're coming out. I always say change the language to inviting in. I think when you change the language to the fact that you're inviting people in, it creates a different environment, because then you have the agency and you're actually running the conversation, right? And so you're literally inviting people into what your lived experience is and what your world is. So I think, one, change the language so it's not so much that you are coming out to these people, which gives them the power, but the fact that you are inviting them in and that they don't have the power to dictate how you invite them in. I think too, I always say, start with like friends, like have like a support system in place. I think sometimes people don't realize that friends exist, like your friends will support you. Or, you know, oftentimes there are some relatives too that already know or like will support you. So it's like, start there and let that kind of like be your bridge into talking to your family just around gender and your own sexual identity. And the final thing is, I always say, like, you can hope for the best, but always be prepared for the worst. The worst being they may not accept you, they may reject you. It's tough. It's very, very tough, but I don't like sugarcoating it. I've always hated the phrase, it gets better. I don't know who started it, but it like literally just needs to end. Like, because for some people, it literally does not get better. And the notion that it will just get better, it's like, no, like people have to make it better. And so that's the other thing I would say is to definitely be prepared in the event that they reject you, and know that it's okay. Like, honestly, it's really, really okay. Process those feelings and emotions, but know that it's okay. But there's greater peace that comes with you living your truth and saying your truth than hiding it from people who say that they love you unconditionally.
So one of the things, and Mark references, that struck me most about your book, and the part of it where I have to just acknowledge that I got tears in my eyes, it was quite emotional for me reading it, was when you talk about how supported you felt by your cousins and your family. And, you know, I don't want to put it in generational terms, but, you know, I mean, there was a range of family responses. I don't know anybody my age who grew up who sensed that kind of support, you know, in their family, experienced that. Because for one,
certainly not in real time as we were adolescents, for sure. Maybe now, but not then. Right. Not the way you did, George.
That's what I mean. And part of it is, you know, our family didn't know anybody like us. You know, I mean, it was like we were like an alien. They had no contact, no reference. What they did know was so awful and terrifying and frightening to them. And that was one of the things that really struck me about the book. Is this is a story of, you know, all the difficulty and trauma and challenges that come with that, but with this supportive family that had that. And do you ever wonder what your life would be like today if you had not had such a supportive family?
I don't. I honestly, like, I've probably never sat to like process like what my life would have been like. Only because the person that I am, adversity is typically what pushes me, and like hopelessness is typically what has always been my catalyst for anything that I've done. So it's like when HIV shaming happens, it pushed me to be an activist, right? Like when I saw Black LGBTQ people being harmed and our stories not being told, it pushed me to be a writer. It pushed me to go into the streets about it. So I feel like if I came from a family where rejection was a thing, it probably would have pushed me even earlier to be more vocal about who I was. I think in many ways, like having the comforts of home and knowing I always had home kind of kept me from exploring so quickly, because it was like I didn't want to disappoint my family. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of like slowed my own progression towards my own queerness in many ways. Whereas I feel just knowing me, had there been pushback, much like when I was in high school and the teacher said he would have owned slaves if he was living in the 1800s, and I pushed back against it. Like I just was always that person. So I could easily see, like, if that happened, I would have probably just been out even more and been myself even more from a younger age and rebelled, I guess, even more. Fortunately, like, you know, I don't have to wonder about it because my family was great. And, you know, hopefully kids in my family will continue to be supported in that way. Kids in my family are supported in that way because, of course, there are still queer kids in my family that are younger than me. And yeah, I don't know. I just think that I am fortunate that I didn't have that experience. However, knowing many of my friends who did have that experience and watching how great they turned out and how powerful they've become, I too imagine that I would have been just as powerful as them.
So Amy Ferris, who's one of the festival co-founders, is asking, how can we inspire other boys to be authentic and genuine in the world? And you talk about other younger people in your family or young queer people in your family. Do you see your relatives who are raising, have you affected them? Has your experience made them different parents?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they don't go into it with an expectation of having heterosexual kids, for one. And I think, but I also think they don't go into it pressuring their children to follow specific roles of a boy, right? Like, I don't think it's as much, like, it's not as heavy, right? It's not like, oh, you need to play football, or oh, we got to get you in sports, or oh, we got to, like, it's not that type of pressure placed on the kids in my family. It's kind of like, well, let's see what they gravitate towards. Let's see, like, and we do everything, right? And whatever it is that you're gravitating towards, that's what we nurture and that's what we support. I think in inspiring boys to be authentic, you literally have to work on tearing down the structures that make them inauthentic. The structures don't allow authenticity. They allow them to go one path. And any step to the left or step to the right of that path literally could land them. I mean, it could land them, especially when you're Black, it could land you in a myriad of situations, right? Like school to prison pipeline, which basically is like Black kids being penalized from a very young age, as early as kindergarten and pre-K, which leads them on a pipeline directly into the mass incarceration. But again, that's because a lot of them don't get allowed to be authentic. They're forced to be hard. You know, they're forced to live with this rage. It always breaks my heart seeing like these young, like 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds at protests. And I'm like, white kids don't have to do this. White kids get to sit and swim and watch cartoons, and Black kids are literally in the street yelling Black Lives Matter at 7 years old. Like, that's what removes our authenticity and doesn't allow us to be genuine in this world, because we're already fighting for our authenticity or fighting for our existence. And so I think the only way we can inspire boys is to start to create spaces for boys where they can be themselves, and where heterosexual boys and queer boys can exist together and it not be a thing. I exist in that fraternity. I exist with a lot of heterosexuals. It's just not that big a deal. It's not that big a deal. It's not a deal at all to them. And I think the more that we see that, the more we'll be more comfortable knowing that queer kids can have heterosexual friends, like as I did growing up, and it'd be fine.
So the one thing you're talking that strikes me is how, you know, in my era of coming out in the 70s and the 80s, one of the, you know, the big things was, oh, you know, my mother or whatever, my parents will be crushed because it means they won't have grandchildren, right? You don't hear that anymore, right? Because it's just so known and accepted. It's a different thing. So there's a question asking about what's a better word than ally?
Advocate. Advocate. I think, again, like I would never say that I was a transgender ally. When I do work on behalf of trans people, I'm not expecting something in return. You know, I do it because I'm supposed to do it. I do it because it's necessary that I do it. So I advocate for them and I advocate on their behalf, or I amplify, right? Like I put them in the position to advocate for themselves. But I think the word ally, you know, like ally bothers me, especially because we give out ally awards. And it's like, well, what does that really mean? Like when you give somebody an ally award, like, thank you for doing something you should have done. Like that shouldn't necessarily be awarded, right? Like, because that's what you're supposed to do. But you get awarded, which then means that there was a mutual exchange, and that's not okay with me, because to protect queer people as straight people, there should be no mutual exchange, because your existence is dependent upon me existing, whether you like it or not. So if you don't fight for my existence, you're literally not fighting for your own existence. So yeah, advocate is the word I like to use.
So Michelle Orm is asking if you're optimistic about the country's future right now.
Optimistic. not the way that these polls are saying white people are split between Trump and Biden. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think I'll say this, as a Black person, like, we've lived in incrementalism our whole existence here in this country. So, you know, what many see as progress, we can literally say it's incremental, right? Because it's like, you know, like a white person will say like, oh, but y'all aren't slaves anymore. It's like, okay, but like, if you look from 1619 to 1865, we were. And if you then go from 1865 to now, that means that we still haven't passed the halfway point yet of being in this country where more than half of our ancestors were slaves, right? Like, we were slaves longer than we haven't been slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we process it like that, but it's like, no, really, like, our people were slaves in this country longer than our people have not been slaves in this country. And so when you look at it like that, right? And then remember, slavery went right into Jim Crow. So Jim Crow then lasted almost 100 years itself. So, you know, it's like post Jim Crow, we have been post Jim Crow, what, 70 years, maybe 60 years, technically. That's not a long existence of what a semblance of freedom looks like. So for us, optimism kind of comes in a thimble because it's kind of incremental. Very long periods of time before we see like actual quote unquote progress. But I do think, like, as Black people, and I will say this, like, I operate out of hopelessness, and many don't look at hopelessness as an optimistic thing. But one of the things that Black people say is making a way out of no way. To make a way out of no way means you have to recognize that you reach no way. And so for Black folks to constantly realize, I have nothing left, we have to make a way out of no way. We live in that hopelessness, and out of that hopelessness is the optimism, I think, that pushes us to say, you know what, I have nothing left, so I've got to make something happen. And then we make that thing happen. So I will say, am I optimistic? I think we're reaching hopelessness, and that from hopelessness typically is when the greatest revolutions come. And so I do think we're reaching that point. And so I will say I'm optimistic that we reach hopelessness and a revolution.
So yeah, I have a sort of an activist mentor who for years has always said that things are going to have to get a lot worse before they get better. But we're spending that time while it's getting worse building the foundation, so we have a springboard from which we will be able to move to get better. I mean, do you find that the sort of sustained, I mean, between BLM and George Floyd and the kind of sustained all these things kind of confront the Trump, that this is not a moment, this is a transition, this is an inflection point into something different for this country?
Yeah, it has to be at this time. I think 4 years ago it wasn't. I think now it's different. I think, you know, I think the country just kind of proved itself to be what it's always been in many ways. And it was like qualifications don't really mean anything in the grand scheme of things, but let's just say someone with no political acumen, crook their whole life, overt racism their whole life, became the most powerful person in the world. That just speaks volumes about your systems. And it speaks volumes, though, because Black folk have been saying these systems don't work, not just for us, but for y'all. Like, trust us. Like, at some point, the system will turn on you, too. And this was the system taking the turn on people who always invested in the system. And even now, they're still trying to invest in the system because their answer to everything is we have to go vote. And it's like, yeah, but like that can't be the answer to a system where voting allowed this, right? So like at some point the system has to change. But BLM, Movement for Black Lives, Black people in general who've been doing activism for centuries in this country have always been at the forefront of thought on these systems are built and designed this way to not just oppress us, but to keep poor whites poor.
Right.
Like, because if rich whites wanted white people to be supreme, they would make sure there were no poor whites. But the only way these systems work is if there are more poor whites than there are poor blacks. But blaming the reason that those whites are poor on the few blacks that may be successful, and the few quote unquote immigrants or the few brown and Latino and like people, and then they think it's us, and they don't realize it's literally these wealthy people. Because if they didn't want you to be poor, they would not make you poor. So yeah, it all goes hand in hand.
How Amy's asking about your father as a police officer. When did your perception of what it meant to be a police officer and policing really change? Did you grow up thinking of him as a hero and this, the guy in the blue shirt and all that sort of thing? When did that change? And yeah, so I'm paraphrasing your question, but
yeah, I don't think I ever thought of my dad as a hero. He was a cop. Like that's how I saw it. He just was a cop. I didn't really grow up seeing quote unquote cops as heroes, in my opinion. Because cops, in my opinion, cops were antagonizers. Because when my dad wasn't around, or if I was in a different city, the cops were antagonistic to me, and the cops treated me like crap. So I didn't necessarily grow up ever thinking that cops were like great people. I thought my dad was a good person who just happened to be a cop. Now, over time, as I learned how systems work and how all cops end up, eventually having to harm black and brown folks, you get that politic. But I think growing up, I never had like a trust in cops. I had a trust in the black cops who were in my city who knew my dad. And I had a little bit of trust in the white cops who were in my city who knew my dad. But outside of that city, there was no protection like afforded to me because my dad was a cop in this small city in New Jersey. So there was never any like hero, like where I lost the image of him being a hero because I just never saw it like that. I just saw it as his job primarily. And I've been through enough situations myself to know how policing affected me personally.
Cool. Tell us a little bit about the plans for the that Gabriel has, or what can you tell us about the optioning of the book, and then if you could also tell us a little bit about what you're working on next, if you're able to share.
Yeah, so plans with Gabrielle, basically we're aiming for it to be a college-centered show, college-centered drama, half hour, focusing primarily on when I graduated from high school and started going to an HBCU, so going from a Catholic school back into a historically black college setting, because those were my formative years around my gender and sexuality. Where I started to learn, where I started to see my community, where I started to engage in consensual sex. And so what we're planning on doing is, doing a series like based around that and based on many of the stories in the book, but also some things that didn't make it into the book that also still really happened in my life. So there will be more learning and more layers about how I became the person I became and who I became and like what I was like in college and what it is like to go through college. The show isn't going to be a period piece though. Period pieces are very hard to make. So it is going to be modernized. It'll still make sense though, because it was only in the early 2000s, but it definitely needed to be modernized because technology, social media, so much has changed.
Sure.
So there will be a modernization that happens. But yeah, that's what we're aiming to do with the show. And we're really excited about it. And it's got, getting a lot of buzz already just from the original press release, and a lot of actors and people are interested in it. And so we're currently working on getting the co-writer so that we can get the pilot created and move on from there. I'm also working on a graphic novel for the Stonewall riots. That's going to take a little while to get done because I've just got so busy, but I am actively working on that, which will be released probably, I would say 2 to 3 years from now. more closely related to the first book, I am writing a book about my grandmother, raising myself, my younger brother, and my 2 cousins. And it's going to focus on what it's like to grow up with a Black grandmother from the South in the North, Black boy joy, the kind of the trials and tribulations that we went through with puberty, policing, and all of those things that young Black boys have to deal with, while also being raised in again, the loving and caring family. But it's also going to give the other side of my grandmother, and tell a lot more of her story in totality, and how life shaped her, and she in turn then shaped all of our lives. So yeah, that's the next book, which should be out September 2021. So yeah, so it's in edits currently because I'm on a fast track. So it's already written and we're already on my line edit.
So
you're very busy. You're putting the rest of us writers to shame with how busy you are. I love the Dorothy Parker quote. She says, "I hate writing. I love having written."
Right.
I love having written, but you're writing. You're exhausting me. You're so busy. That's great. Congratulations.
Okay, and is it fair to ask who will play you in the TV show?
I don't know. A lot of people keep asking me. I don't know, because I would start out because first people were like, "Were you going to play?" I'm like, well, I don't look 18, so no. I don't know. I think maybe this is an opportunity to find some new, brilliant young Black actor who, needed a chance. I think there are several out there already, who I'm sure are going to be considered for the role, but I don't know. It'll be interesting. I think there are a lot
they're playing 18, so you're going to make a star out of somebody. Somebody's going to become a star from this part,
Potentially, yes. That would be amazing.
You said you're looking for a co-writer, so you're writing the TV show as well?
I am, yes. So I will be co-writing as well as executive producing along with Gabrielle. Have
you written plays or drama before, or scripts? Or is this something you're doing?
This is going to be my first foray into screenwriting. So I'm excited about it. But like I said, I hadn't written an article till I wrote my first article, and I didn't write a book till I wrote my first book. So.
Oh, cool. Do we have any other questions from anybody? Let's see. I guess one question I have for you, Joey, we talked a little bit the other day. Are you surprised by the tremendous success this book has had? I know before it came out, I was excited about it, and I had a sense it was going to be a phenomenon, but it's really been amazing.
It has. I think I'm only surprised because of the pandemic. I didn't know. And, unfortunately, I came out at the very beginning of
they delayed the public.
I came out April 28th, and, we went into lockdown March 16th. Right. And and unemployment skyrocketed by the time my book dropped. So, expendable money wasn't there anymore. Disposable money wasn't there anymore. So we just didn't know. And, we just kind of hoped for the best. And, expectations were a little bit lowered. But fortunately, the book did extremely well through our Pride Month, and it's continuing to do well. It's in its 4th printing already, and we haven't reached the 5th month yet. There's some more exciting stuff coming with the book. I can't say it yet because they haven't announced it yet. And, you get Publisher Weekly got to say it first before you can say it. But there is some more stuff coming with All Boys Aren't Blue. So it's selling extremely well, and it's reaching the people who need to put it out on an even bigger platform.
Roland is asking, who's publishing the graphic novel?
Lee and Low Books.
And who's illustrating it?
Her name is Theo Lorenz. She's a queer illustrator.
And who's doing the Broadway play?
I don't know. We never know. Maybe we'll get Terrell from Moonlight to write it.
There you go. Okay, let me just check, see if we have any other questions from anyone. Oh, let's give some credit to the person who did the cover art, which I think is so magnificent. I love, love, love. Gives me an opportunity to hold it up again. There we go.
Yeah, so the amazing Charlie Palmer, based in Atlanta. He's just phenomenal. His work is world renowned. He's a world renowned, and I'm just fortunate that he did my book cover. He did John Legend's most recent album cover. He did Time Magazine's cover 2 or 3 weeks ago. The cover with the young with the Black woman with like the American flag in her hair, like burning. He did that cover. Charlie's just, again, world renowned artist that decided to do my book cover, and I think. I don't know. It's just a testament to like how many people were so invested in this, even from the beginning, to be like, yeah, I think this is going to be something really, really important, and I want to be a part of it. And so, I'm just fortunate that he did that. And the artwork is beautiful, and people love it, and yeah.
Good. All right. I think that is it for us. George and Mark, thank you both very much. We look forward, and when we have our festival live again, Mark has been here before, but we can get you both to come sometime to it live.
Absolutely.
My pleasure. And it was an honor to be here to chat with you, George. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I'm going to get off now because Patti LaBelle is going against Gladys Knight tonight on Instagram. So I need to go log in and watch.
Gladys all the way.
Okay.
Well, thank you, George. Thank you for those insights and an important story that I think will help young people who may be questioning their identity to have a very inspiring role model in your memoir. It's just amazing. And I hope that all the young people are reading it, can read it, that should be reading it. And Mark, thank you for bringing the conversation to life, and Sean for the questions. I also can't believe that this weekend's festival is over already, but it's been an incredible weekend for our first ever virtual festival, and we thank you all again for your support and for joining us. As always, we would appreciate your tax-deductible donation in any amount to keep the festival alive and ready to present to you again next year. You can donate by clicking on the button at our website at milfordreadersandwriters.com. So please mark your calendars, reserve the weekend of September 17, 18, and 19, 2021. Stay tuned to our Facebook page, our website, and Twitter for updates. And we hope to see you in Milford live and in person next year. Thank you all, and good night.